Welcome back. Just a couple minutes for us and we'll get things rolling. Hey there, Kay. Hello, everybody. Welcome, everyone. Okay, hopefully everyone's getting comfortable. Almost ready to get started. All right, let's go ahead then and get started. Welcome back, everybody. So as I've done for some of the most recent meetings, I'm running both of the dual live streams, and that'll give you any option that you want, whether you want to watch this on the YouTube live stream or here on Zoom, or whichever case it is, feel free. But the tape's rolling on YouTube, and now I'm starting to record on Zoom. What I've been doing lately, as I think you guys probably noticed, is just posting the YouTube version of the lecture to our Canvas page, because I think that the size of me lecturing and plus the replay of the live chat is helpful for people. But if there is ever a person that for any reason wants to have a copy of the Zoom meetings, I keep all these recordings on file and I could send it to a person by request. But anyway, guys, that's about that. So welcome back, and thanks everyone for being present at the meeting. I'll hold off a little while before I ask for everybody to leave behind a comment for attendance and stuff, but good to see you guys just to get started so far. Okay, and let's not forget that next Tuesday, anytime before class starts, you'd want to send me your second homework assignment. I mailed out the directions for it on Canvas, and so you can see that there. But if anybody forgot, I'll just make another note right here. It's exercise 5-3. It's on page 151 of the book, and it's letters A through Z in the series of examples there. So don't forget to take a look at that and complete that assignment. And, of course, just whenever you're done, you'll mail that to me as an email attachment, rvulich@occ.cccd.edu. And yeah, so just it has to do with the fallacies of relevance, the group of fallacies that we studied and talked about last class period. So just those 8 are the ones involved on that assignment. Okay, and also, as I think I've said also prior to this, I finished grading all the midterms. So anybody who's looking for the score on the midterm, please email me and I'll definitely reply back to you right away. At the latest, it would be a day or two that I need to reply to everybody, but everybody who sent me messages before class today, I've sent at least one response. So I just encourage you, if you want to know anything about your grade, where you stand, or how you did on that assignment, just reach out to me and I'll be in touch with you and I'll get you your information, including scanned images of the test if you'd like to have those. But a lot of people did pretty well on the test. Okay. So as usual too, if you have questions, comments, reactions to any things that we're saying or doing here, just leave behind a comment anytime in either chat. And I have both windows open, so I'll easily be able to reply to any student watching this in any format. Okay. Gabriel, you're asking, was there extra credit? No, not this time for the request of the grade, but I may do that later in the class. I just kind of want to spread out the opportunities for extra credit a little more. In this case, though, it's just on your own initiative based on your interest in knowing the grade. But I will attempt to award something later in different assignments. Not this one, though. Okay. So cool. Let's just kind of continue going on then. We have a few things to look forward to. So next, let me have my desktop right here. Let me just quickly check on some dates for our class really briefly. Okay, yeah. So Tuesday next week, you have homework assignment 2. That's due. And then Thursday next week, the 4th, you're going to have a quiz. And this quiz is just going to be on chapter 5. So be aware of that. The dates next week are kind of important because you have an assignment due Tuesday and then you have a quiz for Thursday. The goal today is to just finish off the last one of these groups of fallacies. So we've learned about 2 to this point so far. There were the fallacies of fallacies of ambiguity first, and there were 5 of those: equivocation, amphibly, accent, division, composition. And then last class period, we learned about the fallacies of relevance. And I'm going to review those topics again with you guys really briefly to start the meeting. After that, today the main thing is to go over what are called fallacies of unwarranted assumption. And then with that, we'll be complete with our knowledge and information about fallacies. In total, there's 20 of these fallacies that we're all responsible for learning. There are 5 fallacies of ambiguity plus 8 fallacies of relevance. And then today we're going to learn 7 fallacies of unwarranted assumption. So basically 5 plus 8 plus 7 adds up to 20. And those are the 20 different topics that you want to make sure to be pretty clear about in preparation for the quiz that's a week from today. And hi there, Brian, On, Gabriel, everybody else. So I guess we're probably close to our full class size now. So whoever's here, just go ahead, please leave a comment. You can leave it in whichever chat that you want, but I'm just asking for that to kind of keep records that I might need for attendance and stuff. Okay, so make sure to leave a comment if you have not already. Thank you guys, thanks a lot. Okay then, so let me just discuss the fallacies from last time, one more quick go through. Know also that the fallacies of relevance are the ones that are used for the homework assignment that's due next Tuesday. So the homework assignment next Tuesday, that's all that it is involving, just those 8 that we learned last class. And so it's these 8. First of all, well, actually, let me just check in with you. Who here can tell me the name of some of these so-called fallacies of relevance? There's 8 of them. Let's see if we can get them all in the chat. So what do you think are some of the fallacies of relevance? Let me know. Okay, appeal to force, good, that's one of them. And red herring, okay, another one, yes, that's 2. What else? Personal attack, good. Appeal to ignorance, there's a 4th one. So we got half of them. What are the other 4? Appeal to pity, correct. And straw man, yes. What's left? Did I say appeal to ignorance? Maybe I did. A hasty generalization also. Yes, okay, good. I think that's all of them. So let me just kind of quickly say a few words about those to remind you what they are and what they mean. To the first, personal attack. Personal attack fallacy, aka the ad hominem fallacy. So with the personal attack, what happens is somebody doesn't like somebody's claim or their conclusion, right? But instead of giving a logical counter argument, challenging their evidence, saying why it doesn't imply their conclusion, instead of that, they just make a personal attack against the individual. They attack them personally in personal terms. So somebody, provides you with an argument that we should reduce the military budget, and they give you solid reasons why they think that is correct. And you just say, yeah, but I mean, why should I listen to a person like you? You're so poor. Like, how can you even have opinions on stuff? I mean, I know that you barely got any money. Well, in that case, it's a personal attack. It's not at all relevant to the evidence or the statements that they gave to try and make the case for their conclusion. Or if somebody comments on your appearance or talks about your past, how can I listen to a person who one time got in trouble with the police? That's not relevant though to an argument that the person is making on a completely different subject. So you have to make sure that you always focus your attention when having debates and discussions with people on the debated topic and not on the other person who's making the argument or giving the information to you. When you do that, you make a personal attack, and it does not give credibility to your conclusion or claim. If anything, it undermines the effectiveness of your way of reasoning, and so you should not engage in personal attacks. Focus on the argument, not the person. All right. Next, appeal to force. Sometimes people call it the scare tactics fallacy. This is where a person wants you to change your mind or to accept their view, but they simply try to do that by either using or threatening to use force against you. And force can be understood, broadly speaking, to include like financial, legal, emotional pressure, not just literal physical force, although of course that's included. So, your employer says, don't disagree with me on that if you want to keep working here. Your mom or dad says, don't disagree with me on this thing because who pays your tuition? Or, I know you like having a bed to sleep at night in, so maybe you should stop trying to challenge my views. In all these cases, the person's not really making an argument why their view is correct or why the other person's view is wrong. Instead, what they're just doing is trying to scare you and intimidate you into accepting their view or to back down. That's not the right way to argue. If you don't think that someone has the right point of view or they've made the right judgment, then you should be able to find errors in the argument itself, and you shouldn't have to rely on making these scary kind of threats or intimidating tactics, right? So that's the appeal to force. Then there's appeal to pity. Appeal to pity happens when somebody tries to make you feel a little sorry for them and then to give them some kind of special consideration or treatment that maybe is not due to them. So it's when a person tries to rely on pity in a conversation or dialogue, but it's not relevant to the situation. Like, I don't know, saying to the officer, I'm sorry, can you maybe just give me a warning because I'm really sad right now. My friend's partner just broke up with her and it's been very emotional for her, and I've been trying to help her, and it's just also taken its toll on me. I mean, it's kind of sad, but it's not the sort of thing that really matters or is relevant to the question of whether they deserve to get ticketed. Saying to the professor, can you give me an extension on my paper because I don't know, right now I'm having let's say, what's a good excuse? Oh, because I was too drunk last night, so I was drinking so much I couldn't even type. Therefore, I would love to have an extension. I mean, you know how it is in college, how sometimes we get wasted. Anyway, I mean, these are reasons that a person's asking for special, exceptional treatment. But in all the cases here, it's not really about whether they deserve it. It's just trying to make someone feel sorry for them. So whether it's in a personal appeal or something that happens in marketing or advertising, we should not use pity as our sole recourse to get someone to accept our view or to give exceptions to rules. Close family member and I was grief struck. Now, Gabriel, I think in that case it's a little different because it's a serious enough issue. So I choose the examples kind of carefully so that it's not something that does justify special treatment. And the book says as much. The book says, well, if you say the officer, I've got a toddler choking to death, that's why I'm rushing through traffic. It's not quite an appeal to pity because it's a legitimate request for reconsideration of the typical protocol. So I think that if a person's family member has died, that would rise to the level of seriousness that would not make it count as an appeal to pity fallacy. But it's a kind of fuzzy line. I understand maybe someone thinking that. How do we distinguish the cases where it's a real appeal to pity versus a merited request for consideration? Okay, no spoilers though, Sky. I'm only on episode 3 right now, but yeah, that's something that I think we do see in film, in fiction, and so and in real life, of course. So anything that allows you to sort of see the example in a different context is good. Yeah, Gabriel, these are philosophical questions. I think it's just a matter of judgment, isn't it? That's why I pick on the examples that are very extreme and clear, so that I stay away from that gray area in the middle. Do you have a view about it, Gabriel? You asked the question. What would you say if you were being asked the same question? It's tough. I mean, I don't hold the keys to this answer, really. All I can say is that it's a matter of judgment, and a rational person can probably disagree with another about where the exact line is drawn. Many things are like that in life, though, where we don't have precise boundaries across two different concepts. Some people think that there's a lot of grayness and ambiguity, and that's true, but we do have to still have structured thoughts. Yes, I guess so. That's a fair point. Okay, so next up, there is the popular appeal. Popular appeal is simply where you think that something's true or correct just because it's popular. So you refer to popular opinion to gain support for your claim or your conclusion. Yeah, I think I can agree with you there, Sky. If it's something that truly affects their mental state, sure. But if it's trivial, like the person just says, I don't know, I had a nightmare and I'm feeling sad because of that, then that's maybe not enough. So yes, there's some kind of distinctions to be made. Popular appeal, someone just says something's popular, or there's a popular person perhaps that believes in it or endorses it, and therefore it must be good or true. Of course, sometimes the popular crowd can be wrong, and obviously, even if they are right, you still have to give a better argument than that. So if there's a great movie, but it's a popular movie, you should tell me why it's great independently of the fact that it's popular. You should say why it deserves whatever popularity it has achieved based on its own internal meritorious features. Yeah. Well, being drunk does affect your mental state an awful lot, Gabriel, but it's something that the individual chooses on their own initiative. So it's not like a calamity descending upon them from an external source. Of course, at the same time, I guess you can imagine some people are addicted to drugs or alcohol. There's a lot of complications. But anyway, I'm trying to keep it simple for most of us. Popular appeal, I think we understand that. Oh, yeah, I should watch it because everyone's watching it. There you go. That's a good fallacy. It's okay so far. I haven't been blown away, but I know that there's a lot of people watching it. And so maybe I'm just thinking in terms of the popular appeal that it has to have some merit. But I've read some good reviews of it, and I've heard that it explores like themes of like, I don't know, the modern day kind of condition of workers and the pressures that capitalistic society places on us. Anyway, appeal to ignorance. That's another one. That's when a person claims something is true just because nobody has ever been able to prove that it's false, or that something is false because no one's been able to prove that it's true. That's not how the burden of proof works. You don't just get to make a claim and say, and I'm right until you prove me wrong. If you're the one making the claim, you have to bring the evidence. And if you don't have evidence, then you can't just say, I win, because nobody's been able to debunk this statement or claim. With the notable exception, I guess, of the courts of law, where we bend over backward to grant a presumption of innocence unless and until proven guilty. But in ordinary life, the burden of proof is on an individual making claims. Yes, it's true, Gabriel. It's a mind-blowing fact, isn't it? Philosophy and life are complicated and nuanced. Yes, they are. But that's what we're doing. That's what we have to do. So we can't really affect that. Yeah, so if I say aliens exist because you can't prove that they don't, ghosts exist because you can't prove that they don't, I'm not giving you evidence towards the proposition. I'm just challenging you to disprove it, prove me wrong, kind of thing. But I need to be able to prove myself correct if I have a claim that I'm putting out there. Okay, so then it's hasty generalization, which is simply when a person jumps to a general conclusion, but they do it off of a limited sample of evidence, or they do it on the basis of cases that are not representative of the general case. So somebody gets bit by a dog and they think all these dogs must be brutal, killer dogs, or they have like one or two bad experiences with a member of, I don't know, like a man or a woman. They think all men or all women have these problems. Oh, and Kelvin, Alice in Borderland. I have seen the Alice in Borderland. Yeah, it's a very similar plot. So that's one I have seen. And you think it's better than the Squid Games? Yeah, well, I've already seen that one, so I guess I can't rewatch, but I might do it anyway at some point when I forget a little more of the plot. So yeah, hasty generalization. We've got some examples there. Next up, it's straw man. Straw man is when you take your opponent's actual position or argument and you distort or you misrepresent it, so that sounds like it's easier to just reject. I don't know, somebody tells you that, okay, Death survival games are not that special in Japanese media. It's just overplayed, especially in anime, manga, Squid Game. Everyone is just watching due to popularity. Yeah, we've talked a little bit about that. But by the way, Kay, I did watch Psycho Pass, the first episode. It was pretty cool. And now I think I'm kind of hooked. I might watch some more. But anyway, that's on a separate issue. Talking about anime or whatever. Yeah, so with strawman, you take the opponent's real argument, you take it and you distort it so that it sounds worse. Somebody says, I believe that a woman has a right to choose, and that's because she has bodily autonomy, which supersedes the rights of the fetus that is not a full person yet. And someone's like, okay, so let me understand what you're saying. We should just be able to kill babies and toddlers. I mean, that's barbaric. That's horrifying. I can't believe you're really saying that. But the person didn't say that. They're making an argument in favor of pro-choice when it comes to abortion of the fetus, not killing live, newborns. On the other hand, you can imagine a pro-life exchange on the other side. Somebody says, look, I think that a fetus has a capacity for a full future, a future like ours. And isn't that what makes killing people wrong? So I think it's wrong to abort. And someone says, okay, so basically, let me understand you. You're saying we should just lock women up, not allow them to work. They're just baby makers. They don't have any freedom of their own. What kind of weird view do you have about women? But in this case, again, it's perhaps a mischaracterization of the view. There are fair criticisms to make of both sides of these arguments, but these would not be the best available ways to make those critiques. Okay. Somebody says that one drug should be legalized. Their opponent says you believe in the legalization of all drugs. Yeah. So not to worry. Got that one in. Next up, we have, I think we were down to the last one, which is red herring. So red herring happens when you try to distract from the main point of a discussion or argument, and you bring up a separate unrelated topic. So it's like bringing up a tangent, an unrelated issue. Somebody says to you, we've got a real problem with climate change around this planet, needs to be fixed. And somebody says back, no, we don't have a problem with that. I mean, immigration is the real problem. Well, maybe there are both problems, but there's no way to like challenge the one viewed by just bringing up a separate topic, or what if somebody says, violence against women is really something that we need to take control of as a society. And someone says, no, I think it's violence against animals that's a real problem. But it's a different issue, so that's a red herring. It's a distraction from the main point of conversation. So when those happen, you have to redirect the conversation to the original topic so that we don't get bogged down in unnecessary reasoning on a different subject. Okay, so with all that, now I'm going to talk to you guys about these new group of fallacies, the last one that we'll learn today. And they're called fallacies of unwarranted assumption. And okay, so just getting the label for the category into the chat. Fallacies of unwarranted assumption. So first of all, what they are, what the definition of the category is this. So with these fallacies, the problem is that they're arguments which include some type of assumption that is not supported by evidence. So okay. Cool. So fallacies of unwarranted assumption. When an argument includes an assumption, but it's not supported by the evidence. So warranted is just kind of another synonym for justified. So this is basically where we have fallacies, and the problem is that there are unjustified assumptions being made. Somehow there's an assumption built into the argument, and there's no evidence for this assumption. So that makes the argument weak, fallacious, and not to be relied on. So there are actually 7 of these different fallacies of unwarranted assumption. I'm going to list them first in the chat, and then as we have done before, I'll just go over each of them, give the definition, and talk about it, different examples. So what we have here is, first of all, begging the question. Okay, begging the question, first one. And then next, it's inappropriate appeal to authority. Okay, so that's our second out of the 7 here. Inappropriate appeal to authority. Moving down to the next, we've got loaded question. Okay, loaded question. Moving on to false dilemma. That's another one, false dilemma. And a couple more. Questionable cause. So then we just have slippery slope. And finally, it's last but not least, naturalistic fallacy. Okay, so here we have our plan to cover these 7 items in that order from top to bottom. So starting off then with the first, which is begging the question. So the begging the question fallacy happens when one of the premises of the argument is just a slightly reworded version of the conclusion. So it's the same as the conclusion, but it's just a couple of words are edited to make it sound like it's different, but it's the same exact information. So when one of the premises of the argument is just a reworded version of the conclusion, begging the question. Okay. So think about this. When you have an argument, the conclusion is supposed to be a claim that you're trying to prove, right? But the premises given are supposed to be evidence that supports that claim. Clearly, then the evidence, the premises, cannot be the same thing as the conclusion. Like if I just say to you that America is the greatest country because America is the greatest country, that's not really a significant argument with substance to it because it doesn't give reasons that this is true. It just says it's true because it's true. So obviously you need independent support for any conclusion. That means that the premises cannot simply be identical to the conclusion, even if the words are slightly different. So like here's an example that the book gives, which I think makes a clear point toward this concept. Suppose we have this argument which just says, so okay, so first premise, it says it is immoral to impose death as a penalty for a crime, and therefore, conclusion, capital punishment is wrong. Okay, so the argument has this conclusion. The conclusion of the argument is capital punishment is wrong. Suppose someone tells you that and you're like, okay, well, why though is it wrong? Can you argue for it? Can you tell me why you think so? And they say, okay, yeah, sure. The reason capital punishment is wrong is because it is immoral to impose death as a penalty for a crime. But let's look at the argument a little more closely for a moment. What is a different way of referring to the concept of capital punishment? Like literally what is capital punishment? Someone maybe knows this. What is it? Capital punishment. It is the death penalty. It's just sort of the more legalistic way of talking about the death penalty. Capital crimes are, the most serious offenses where people who commit them, at least in our legal system, are eligible to face the death penalty. So like premeditated murder, certain acts of like terrorism, and whatever can be examples of kinds of crimes that receive the death penalty, the capital punishment. Capital punishment is just using death as a penalty for a crime. And what is another synonymous way of referring to the concept of something being wrong? You could say something's wrong, or another way of saying the same thing is to say that it's what? Another term for the idea of something being wrong is that it is immoral. Correct, Nate? So if a person says capital punishment is wrong because it's immoral to impose death as a penalty for a crime, then they're not really giving any independent reasons for the conclusion. At the end of the day, what it just says is capital punishment is wrong, therefore capital punishment is wrong. Or if you like, the death penalty is immoral, therefore the death penalty is immoral. Now, could there be a good argument that the death penalty is wrong? Yes, there surely could be, and there are. Some people oppose the death penalty. You could argue that human life is sacred, and when people are incarcerated for capital crimes, they are no longer a danger to society. So killing them is just gratuitous. Therefore, the death penalty is immoral. In that case, though, I don't just flatly say it's wrong because it's wrong. I give at least some attempt to give different reasons for that conclusion. Let me try to give you some other examples of circular arguments. Point to note, this term, begging the question, it is sometimes called the fallacy of circular argument, because basically the argument goes in a circle, like a dog chasing its tail or whatever. The conclusion, you're looking to the premises to see support. But when you look at those premises, it is the conclusion, and so it just kind of goes in a little loop or circle. Sometimes it's the main name we're using is begging the question, because it's like, if you have a circular argument, the question still remains, why is the conclusion true? You haven't really given any reason yet if you're just saying the same thing over and over again. So imagine that someone's talking about sports. Sometimes people make arguments about sports, about which teams they think are the best, or whoever's best player. What if somebody said to you that Michael Jordan's the greatest basketball player of all time, and you're like, okay, I would love to know why you think that. Give me your best argument. And they say, okay, here's why. Because if you look at all the players that have ever played in the game, all the other players are way worse than him. So therefore, he's the best. Now, can you guys understand how that's circular? I'm not denying that Jordan might be the best, although I kind of think LeBron is really good too. But anyway, yeah, like, why would that be a circular argument? Because to say he's the best, I need a reason. And if the reason is because everyone else is worse, it's not different from saying that he's the best, because what it means for somebody to be the best is to be better than everybody. And so by putting it as, he's the best because nobody else is quite as good, it's not really giving a reason why he's the best. Now, you could make an argument that Jordan's the best. You could say, well, he never lost in the NBA Finals. And I don't know, let's see, he was a defensive player of the year multiple times, not just a great, scorer. He made his teammates better. You could talk about all kinds of things as your reasons for claiming that he's the greatest player. But if you just say he's the greatest player because nobody's as good as him, that's just repeating yourself, and you're not giving new reasons. Maybe one more example from our book that I thought was kind of interesting to go through. Here's one from the book. It says, so the first premise, God wrote the Bible. Second premise, the Bible says that God exists. God wrote the Bible. The Bible says God exists. So therefore, conclusion, God exists. Now, in this argument here, let me ask somebody, which one of these two premises already assumes that the conclusion is true? It maybe takes a moment to see this, but just look at the two and tell me one of them is just already assuming the truth of the conclusion. Yeah, the first premise. That's right, Gabriel, because it says what? God wrote the Bible. Who wrote it? God. But if a person wrote something, then they have to exist to have written it. So the first premise is already assuming the truth of the conclusion, but the conclusion is what you're trying to prove. So you can't give as evidence the thing you're trying to prove. If I say to you that God wrote the Bible and therefore God exists, it's already assumed in the claim that he wrote the Bible. Yes, that's right, Sky, and also Gabriel. So now, no problem with arguments that God exists. There are high-quality arguments for the existence of God that do not beg the question. And I think maybe I've mentioned them in passing before when we talked about, like, believing God because it's popular. That's not a good reason. But you could argue that God exists because the universe has to have a cause, or you could argue that God exists because life is too complex to happen through a random set of processes. But just saying he exists because he exists is not a very effective way to argue, because there's no independent reasons given towards the conclusion. Okay, so last word on begging the question before we move to the next. As the book says, the conclusion God exists is already assumed to be true in the premise that the Bible is the Word of God. To offer a rational proof of God, we cannot assume in our premise the existence of what we're trying to prove. Begging the question fallacy can be very frustrating if we don't recognize it, since there's no way to disprove the person's conclusion if we accept their premise. So if you think an argument begs the question, try reversing the conclusion with the premise to see if the argument will say the same thing, essentially. Okay? All right, then. So I guess that's clear enough. Let's move then to the inappropriate appeal to authority. So the inappropriate appeal to authority fallacy happens when somebody appeals to the view of another person to support their argument or conclusion. But the problem is that this person is not an expert, they're not an authority, in other words, on that subject. So okay. So there's inappropriate appeal to authority. The fallacy definition is right there. A person appeals to another person's view in order to support their conclusion, but problem, this person's not an authority on the subject. So sometimes people rely on false authority, and that does not provide any support to their argument. If anything, it actually makes it seem worse because if there was a real authority, then they probably should have supported that claim. Um, so somebody says this, I was getting my car fixed and I was just hanging out talking to the auto mechanic, and the auto mechanic, he told me these vaccines kill. So definitely they're not safe. I'm not going to use them. What's the problem there with that argument? How is it an inappropriate appeal? They're not an expert or know anything about what they're arguing. So no disrespect to people that are good with cars and automotive stuff. That's a skill and that is knowledge. If you wanted to cite their expertise when talking about their views about the diagnostic problem of your car, then that's the right type of authority to cite. But this person's out of their realm when they're talking about things that epidemiologists, public health professionals, medical experts know. So it's false authority. I find it interesting and odd that people will rely on authority that's false, but then actual expertise they don't trust. Another example of inappropriate appeal to authority is sometimes people just use their parents as their source of authority. So it's my parents told me that climate change doesn't exist, and so therefore it doesn't exist. But the problem is, a lot of these people's parents don't know anything. If they know something, then they should be quoted as an expert in that field. Unless they are, then their views don't hold weight on the things that they are testifying or attesting to. That's what it says in the book too. Young children, for example, look to their parents as authorities, even in areas where they have little or no expertise. Here's another example given by the book. My priest says genetic engineering is not safe, therefore all experimentation in the field should be stopped. I mean, a priest has certain knowledge and expertise about matters of theology, the history of the church, the doctrines of the Bible, but it's not necessarily the sort of person you would refer to as an authority in a different subject area. So, if you're going to cite, wouldn't it just be their opinion over facts? I guess it would be, but the thing is, people sometimes use these opinions as a solid base of evidence, like so and so said this, and therefore they must be right. But you're quoting and citing a person that's not the right authority to refer to. Sometimes when people have distinguished titles, that can cause this fallacy to be committed because people have this, it's sometimes called the halo effect, where you think that because someone's really knowledgeable on one subject, that they must be knowledgeable across the board. But no, it takes specialized training and research to become skilled in one field. And if you haven't done that, then why should your view have the same weight as someone from that field? So I'm a doctor, I have a research-based doctorate, so I'm Dr. Vulich, PhD, and so I have one of these, titles. But if you say to your, somebody later, hey, Dr. Vulich, doctor, he said that helium is the most heavy element in the periodic table, so that must be true. I mean, I'm not a chemist. I'm not a chemistry person. In fact, full disclosure, that was my worst subject ever when I was a student. I just, for some reason, it's hard for me to learn. It's a lot of stuff that you just have to memorize. But anyway, I am a doctor of philosophy, and if you want to know anything about logic, reason, argument, the history of philosophy, famous arguments that have appeared throughout time, I'm certainly expert and authoritative on those things. But I would be the wrong type of authority, despite my title of doctor, in another area. And sometimes people do that. Like there was this guy, Dr. Scott Atlas, who's a radiologist, and he was attacking Dr. Fauci the whole 2020 year while he was trying to get us to mask up, distance, take vaccines, whatever. Um, the problem, though, is as a radiologist, he's not really qualified to talk about infectious diseases because he's not an infectious disease specialist. But someone just sees the title doctor and they're like, okay, he must know his things. He must know his stuff. So anyway, guys, another case where this can happen is when we rely on people who are like famous celebrities and they endorse products that their expertise doesn't qualify them to say anything about. It's a little different from popular appeal, but it's kind of got a similar vibe where with popular appeal, you say the celebrity endorses it, so it must be true. You could also kind of spin it as the celebrity endorses it, but what do they know about this topic? Anyway, okay. So with that, I guess we can move to the next, which is loaded question. So loaded question is a fallacy that happens in the way that people ask certain questions that have assumptions built into them. So it's basically when you ask a question, but the question itself assumes the answer to a different question that you didn't ask. Okay, so okay. So there's that definition. Loaded question. One asks a question that assumes an answer to a different question that you didn't ask, or that they did not ask, perhaps, to get the right agreement between the pronouns there. Anyway, so like here's a question. Somebody asks you, who are you dating? Now, if they don't know you too well, how could that be a loaded question? Just for an example, because there's an assumption built into the question. I think you can tell me what it is. That you're dating somebody, right? And it's just a question of who they are, what their identity is. Now, if you're not dating anybody, you're not seeing anybody, then you can't just give a straight answer. You can't be like, here, it's this person. Instead, you have to correct the questioner. You have to say, I'm sorry, but you're kind of assuming something about me you really don't know. So I have to reject the premise of your question, which is that I'm dating somebody. It's a loaded question. Sometimes, I guess, with, I don't know, sexual orientation and stuff, this can happen. Suppose somebody tells you they were hanging out with their partner, and you're like, oh, who is she or who is he, right? Assuming that they have a certain gendered partner. If you don't know what their orientation is, then it's perhaps better to say, who are they? Because after all, if you say she, then you're assuming the gender, and the person might say that's a loaded question when you ask about she. It's not a woman. For example, just another possibility. How about, someone could ask a person like personal questions that assume things that are not known, like when did you lose your virginity, or when did you graduate college? What's your major? Like assuming you're even a student. If you're not a student or any of those other things, then these could be, again, loaded questions. Sometimes we see loaded questions exchanged or given in a legal situation where, like, say, lawyers are trying to ask leading questions to get people to say things that maybe haven't been established by facts or evidence yet. So imagine like lawyers cross-examining the accused person and says, I know you've said you're not guilty, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to just finally come clean. Tell us right now for the first time, why did you do it, sir? Why did you do it? Well, it's a loaded question. If the person claims innocence, then they're not going to be able to tell you what the motive is because they didn't do it at all, according to their version of events. Here's one from the book, just to give you an example from there. Suppose someone asks you, do you think that the death penalty should just be for people above 18? Like, what do you think the minimum age for the death penalty ought to be? Now, how is that a loaded question? Can anybody tell me the assumption in that case? Do you think the death penalty should only be for people 18 and above? What's loaded in there? What's the assumption that's made? It assumes that you even support it in the first place, right? And of course, you might not. Some people, some very well-known people do not support the death penalty. Our governor, Gavin Newsom, he's put a moratorium on the penalty, so there won't be any death penalty executions in California for as long as he's the governor. President Biden, I mean, he's opposed to the death penalty, as a lot of Catholics are, which he is. So again, it's a loaded question. Here's one that happened in real life. I remember that. I'll never forget it. It's like a memory from my childhood. But I was hanging out with some friends way back in the day, and we were hanging out at one of our friends' like house, and his mom was there, just kind of like supervising us, whatever. And there was this new kid in the group that didn't really know this person's mom very well. So when she walked in to just sort of say hi, he said to her, "Oh wow, like when is the baby due?" But she was not pregnant, right? So it's kind of like a body shaming thing, and she was very offended. She's like, "What are you talking about? I'm not pregnant." So um, there's another example, of a loaded question. So you want to make sure when you ask questions to people, guys, that you're a little bit patient and that you don't just jump to conclusions. Establish things one at a time. So instead of asking someone, "Who are you dating?" you can ask, "Are you dating anybody? Are you in a relationship?" And then you can move on to questions about who. But um, these kind of weird loaded questions, sometimes we commit them without thinking, sometimes they happen to us, but there's a name for that concept, and this is what it is. This is one that's really simple and happens quite often. I've noticed in relationships sometimes. Have you ever had a person just kind of say to you, "What's wrong?" How can that be a loaded question? I'm not saying it's not good to check on people, it is, but sometimes this question could be loaded because what's assumed? By asking what's wrong, simply the person's assuming what? That something's wrong, right? And if there's nothing at all wrong, then you can't give a simple answer of what it is, because maybe there's nothing going on at all. And so when someone asks you that, you can be like, why do you assume something's wrong? I'm not saying there's anything wrong. Just depends. Okay. All right, guys. So that's a loaded question for us. So we've covered a few, covered 3 so far. Um, you could answer nothing is wrong, but if you did, um, I guess, well, kind of, Gabriel, like what you're saying is the concept of nothing is the thing that is wrong. Like the empty set is wrong or something. That'd be I don't know, but I still think it counts as the fallacy though, because nothing is not a thing. But anyway, yeah, so let's continue. Let's talk about the false dilemma. So the fallacy of false dilemma happens when there's some like complex, nuanced type of issue or situation, but the problem is that somebody reduces the responses to it to like a binary black and white either or. Okay, so okay. Okay, so false dilemma. One reduces the responses to a complex issue to like a binary, polarized either or choice. Sometimes this is called the false choice fallacy. I've also heard it called false dichotomy, but any way you could label it, our book, they go with the term false dilemma. So there's more than 2 options or responses that are possible, but it gets simplified to 2, oversimplified. So I don't know. Somebody asks you, so what is your political affiliation, Republican or Democrat? How is that a false dilemma? It ignores what possibilities that are different from both. Let me ask. Someone will not let me know. You could be a third party. Yes. You could be independent voter, or politically unaffiliated. Yes. A moderate. Me, for example, I'm neither one. I've been declined a state voter for pretty much my whole voting life. Um, which is kind of nice because then I get to vote in different primaries, not just for one party or another. So to ask the person Republican or Democrat is a false choice. It's a false dilemma. Or what if somebody says, you know, how do you feel about the United States? This is in the book too, so I'm going with one example from the book. How do you feel about our country? Do you love it or you want to leave it? Love it or leave it? What is it going to be? How is love it or leave it a false dilemma? What's not either of those that is another option? Love it or leave it. And you're like, well, actually, neither, because what? Yeah, you can love it but see the faults. Well, I don't know. You don't even need to love it. That's one of the 2 things that are on the opposite extremes. You could be a person that says, "I don't necessarily love it, but I don't want to leave either. I want to stay right here and continue to voice my criticisms to hope for things to change and become better." I've always thought the love it or leave it argument is kind of weak because if you live in a democracy like we do, then one of the freedoms that you're entitled to is to be able to raise issues and complaints about the political status quo and reform. So you don't have to love it or leave it. You can stay right there and complain, and that's not a problem. Um, how about someone asks you, "Do you love me or hate me?" It's like a personal thing. Like, how do you feel about me? Is it love or hate? You might just be indifferent. You might just be like, I don't know, neither really, just kind of blah, just meh, whatever. I'm not just like passionate on this question about how I feel. Um, and this is like all or nothing thinking. Sometimes if the mind gets kind of trapped in this all or nothing, like polarized way of thinking, then you never see nuance and you never see subtlety. Um, they talk about in the book that sometimes eating disorders can exhibit this pattern of thought. Like a bulimic person thinks that if I'm not just like inducing vomiting to make myself rail thin, then I believe that I'm just hideously obese. They can't see a healthy weight as like a concept that's like something in the middle of these other two opposite extremes. Um, Sometimes the results of surveys and polls will commit this fallacy, and if they do, then the results are not necessarily good results to be relied upon. For example, um, the book talks about an example like that. So they say here, how options are presented in a question can influence the response. For example, in one survey, people were asked whether they felt that the courts deal too harshly or not harshly enough with criminals. When only those two options were given, 6% said too harsh, 78% said not harshly enough. But when a third alternative was provided, do not have enough information to say, 30% chose that response, and only 60% said not harshly enough. So that would be a flawed um, design of a public survey or an opinion poll. And if you relied on the one with only two options, then you would have a false picture of the distribution of public opinion because they're only giving people two quite different options when there's actually a full menu of options with things in the middle. Okay, so to avoid the fallacy of false dilemma, watch out for like either or questions that try to put you on the spot. It's always fair to say to a person who says such a thing, I'm sorry, but that is a false choice. I think there's more than just these two things that you're presenting me with, or these two alternatives that you think are the only ones. Okay? Yeah, so I guess we're good on that one. So I guess it's next up, the questionable cause fallacy. The questionable cause is simply when a person thinks that one thing is the cause of another, but there's just no evidence for it. So, sorry here. Yeah. So when one assumes without good reason that one thing is the cause of another. Questionable cause. All right. So one of the things that sometimes any of us can do is like we like to see connections in things, sometimes even when there is no connection. And in some cases, when one event happens first in time and then another one happens like after that, later in time, a person will just kind of automatically assume that the first thing caused the second one, even though there's no like link between them and there's no relationship between the two things. And so that's what it is to have a questionable cause fallacy. Superstitious beliefs and things like that can sometimes give good examples of this. So here's a few. Somebody is like just taking a nice walk and they just see like a little black alley cat pop out and they cross paths with them. Okay, so that happened. Then later on in the same day, as they were driving around, oops, they got into like a little minor fender bender with their car, which is annoying, and now it's going to mess with their insurance, and it's just very frustrating that that happened. So now the person's looking back on their day, and they make the assumption that what? Can you follow my narrative and give me my example here? That the person would assume, based on our example, that it was the cat's fault, right? It was the case of the black cat crossing the path that was at fault for that caused the unlucky incident later. Now, maybe you've heard about like sort of myths, legends, tall tales that the black cat crossing your path is bad luck, but that's obviously not the cause of the car accident. The cause itself is whatever was happening locally in the car and on the road with you and the other drivers when the accident actually happened. If it was true that a black cat crossing your path could somehow bring about bad luck, then we would all have bad luck at some point given the prevalence of these cats. And then what about people who own black cats? I know a lot of people that do, and it's not like they just systematically have bad luck. There you go, Kay. Um, if this was a true assumption, then we should expect that those types of people are just constantly beset with terrible luck. And another thing is, just on the topic while we're on it, this kind of weird sort of superstitious reputation that people have given to black cats has made it so that they're like less commonly adopted if you just look at the statistics on it. And so it's really just not a helpful thing for people to believe. But yet some people will believe these kinds of things. Um, you wear a certain shirt or a pair of socks, and then like a test or quiz that you weren't prepared for is canceled that day by the professor who couldn't make it. Now you're like, yes, I'm so lucky. Wow, I know it's those socks that I love that caused him to become sick. But obviously, that can't possibly be the case. I mean, it's like a person's situation happening in a completely different part of time and space. And if that was so, then you could just wear these socks and like reliably game the system to make everything happen to your favor, which of course we know doesn't happen. Um, I don't know. Uh, you walking along, you step on like a big crack on the sidewalk, and just a little while later, you get like a text message from your mom, and she's like, "Can you help me? I need a ride to the hospital. I actually fell in the kitchen, and it's pretty bad, and I may have hurt my back. Um, so I just need you to come help." Now, you guys have probably heard the old nursery rhyme, step on a crack, break your mother's back. Obviously, the cause of the breaking is whatever happened in the kitchen, and it couldn't possibly be the crack because if it was, then all of our mothers at some point would have had a broken back, just given the prevalence of such things in the world. Gabriel, I don't think superstition is real, but I do believe being superstitious can be self-fulfilling. Yes, it could, I guess, maybe be. Um, but when you're rational, you don't really care about that. You just care about reasons and evidence and not necessarily the emotional side. But, I digress. It's better to be a dissatisfied Socrates than a satisfied pig, according to Mill and others. So maybe happiness is not the only goal of life, but rationality. And maybe sometimes being rational doesn't make you happy because the truth hurts. Kelvin, I remember one time when I was a little kid, I messed up with the ancestral altar, and then a series of unlucky things happened to me. Don't know if that's a fallacy or not. Yeah, haha. Well, I mean, maybe. Well, I guess you'll find out, but hopefully you're having some better luck now. Yeah, the positive side, four-leaf clovers and the rest, it's the same thing, Kay, for sure. It's questionable, isn't it, that that's the cause? You need reliable evidence that could be produced under controlled conditions where you have like a dependent and independent variable, and it's not the way it works. So yeah, I don't know, another example, this is just along the same lines, right? So Jennifer Lopez, I'm sure you guys have heard of that performer and actress. One day, her mother, Guadalupe Lopez, actually won a big amount of money on a slot machine that she was playing in Atlantic City. And they're already a pretty wealthy family, but they won 2 million more. Anyway, afterwards, they asked her, "What do you thought about that?" And she said, "Well, right before I said like a little good luck charm to Our Lady of Guadalupe, and I think that's why I won. But of course, if you could win by doing such a thing, then you could reliably win, and you could therefore make sure that the house always loses, and they would cease to be profitable, so the casinos could not operate. We know this is not the way it really works, so it's not as if the drawing of the whatever random outcome could possibly have taken view of what the people are doing because these are inanimate objects. But anyway, there you go. Different examples of questionable cause. Last one, Babe Ruth, the Bambino, the Babe, the classic baseball player from earlier 20th century. I guess he was playing for the Boston Red Sox and they traded him to the New York Yankees in 1920, and he really didn't like that trade. So he was upset and he said, "I'm placing a curse on the Boston Red Sox." And then they actually didn't get to the World Series, or they didn't win the World Series for 80 years pretty much until 2004. And so during that whole span of time, a lot of people said, "Wow, look at this long run of futility. It's got to be the curse of the Babe Ruth." But obviously it had a lot more to do with, the players, the composition of the team, and so on. They did eventually win, though, in 2004. It was actually like a stunning comeback because I think they were down 0-3 in the series, and they came all the way back to win 4-3, which has never happened before or since. In the NBA, it's still never happened, even in the playoffs once with all the different series that have been played. Keep thinking some team's going to have to make a comeback from 0-3, but all we've seen is coming back from 1-3. Okay, so guys, questionable cause. Look for real good evidence to assess cause and effect. Just because one thing happened before something else is not a good enough reason, or at least I hope we can agree it's questionable at best. Yeah, no, I agree with you, Gabriel, yeah. Cursed objects, Busby's chair. Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the example, so I don't catch the reference, but I don't think there's any such thing as a curse in general, although sometimes people may feel cursed by just the circumstances they find themselves in. I don't know. People like to believe they have control over things that they don't. People like to think that, there's some kind of like, I don't know, supernatural connection between things that can't be explained scientifically. But if you want to be a good critical thinker, then you have to somehow renounce these ways of thinking. Okay, so we can go to the next. which is the slippery slope fallacy. Okay. So slippery slope is the mistaken idea that if one type of action is either permitted or just taken, then eventually all actions of that type will either be taken or permitted. So okay, there's slippery slope. Um, the erroneous, so like mistaken or done in error, idea that if one type of action is taken or permitted, then eventually all actions that are the same kind and generally like worse and worse will be taken or permitted. Um, so let's see. Somebody's got a kid and they're begging for a candy bar at the store, and like another person says, "Hey, don't give in. Don't give in to that kid that's asking for it because it may seem like a small thing, right? But if you do that, eventually in life later, they're gonna be so spoiled they'll never be able to hear no for an answer. They'll never be able to be patient enough to wait for things that they want, and you don't want that kind of adult like throughout life. So don't give in the one case. But is it really true that the one action is necessarily going to lead to that? At least it doesn't seem necessarily true, and there'd have to be a better basis of evidence to make such a sweeping claim based on the one act. Have you ever heard of the gateway drug argument? Don't take one sip of that alcohol or whatever it is, even just a little one, because if you do, it's putting you on a slippery slope towards full blown addiction. And do you really want to have that in your life? I mean, eventually you're going to not be able to raise a family, keep a job, finish school, and you probably have a lot of health problems and legal problems. So I would say don't even take one little whatever of that. But again, I mean, this is contradicted by a variety of factual evidence that people, for the most part, don't necessarily find themselves absolutely destitute on the basis of minor indulgence and some of those things. So perhaps another case of slippery slope. I've heard some say that we shouldn't be developing artificial intelligence for these computers and so on. Why not? Have you ever seen the Boston Dynamics, like amazing robots that they've got that can do parkour and like all kinds of other stuff? Some people say we shouldn't be building these because why? What's wrong with having AI? According to the slippery slope fallacy, anyway. Anybody think they can? Yeah, well, they saw Terminator. There you go. They're thinking that this puts us on a slippery slope towards a dystopian, nightmarish future where the robots will become so smart that they'll realize that human beings are inefficient and obsolete, and therefore we must be enslaved and destroyed. So, is that what kind of future we want? Therefore, don't develop strong AI. But again, there's no good evidence to support these claims. So, they're just based on fear and kind of conspiratorial thinking in a way. Now, the idea of slippery slope has a kind of visual that you should think of to kind of make it more memorable. So imagine a person standing atop a high hill, okay, and there's like steep slopes leading down from where they're perched up there, and they're thinking of taking just one little step, from the top. But you're the person warning them, saying, "Hey, don't do it. If you take even one step, it may seem like a small step, but it's not going to stop there because this slope is steep and it's slippery. So you'll lose your footing once you take that step, and then you will just keep slipping down the slope, getting worse and worse injuries as you inevitably descend towards the bottom. So don't take the first step." And that's kind of how slippery slope is a metaphor for the fallacy itself. We're being told if you allow one thing to happen, or if this one type of action is given, then it's not going to stop there. It's going to compound and become worse and worse. I remember people making this type of argument in policy debates about the elimination of the "don't ask, don't tell" policy that used to say, gay people could not openly serve in the military. During the Obama administration, they rescinded this policy, right? So now people can openly serve regardless what their orientation might or might not be. But some people that opposed the changed policy said, well, we can't do that. Or if we do, what probably will happen is, it's going to affect unit cohesion and military readiness in the ranks. And that's eventually going to put us on a slippery slope towards, foreign invasion and overthrow of our military and government. You're reminded of butterfly or domino effect. Yeah, well, butterfly effect is like it's like causes that you can't possibly be fully aware of lead to things that you wouldn't have been able to predict. Like a butterfly flapping its wings somewhere creates an air current that somehow leads to, like, a hurricane in another part of the world or whatever. Um, but it's a little different because there's no necessary prediction of like a bad result that comes from the so-called butterfly effect. Um, but yeah, it is sort of in the same, at least ballpark of concepts. Kelvin, you say, actually, many people think that in the near future, when more AI is developed, then they will replace humans to do all the jobs, and then people will be more jobless in some specific fields. But wouldn't that be great? Who wants to work? I don't want to work. If I could have a robot teaching philosophy and, building all the roads and stuff, then we could all just chill. And maybe just read books on our own to get smart, but without having the social pressure to make money. I don't know. Yeah, it's a weird future to consider. But what will be the ultimate impact of having all these robots take over some human labor? Certainly, machines have taken over a lot of the jobs that people used to have to do, but it also makes our lives a little easier. So on balance, I'm kind of neutral on that, I guess, me. I remember as a kid, there was this little children's story that was like, if you give a mouse a cookie, I don't know if this book or story still exists in the youth now, but it's kind of like almost like related to the slippery slope fallacy. But and then how could you make money though? I don't want money. I want happiness, just happiness. Money is for the happiness, not the other way around. But anyway, I'm just being fun. Universal basic income, is that what you're saying, Gabriel? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just riffing on whatever you guys are saying. If you're saying that the robots coming and taking our jobs is a problem, I just parry back with the statement that why do you want a job? If a world could exist without any of us working, wouldn't that be great? That's how it used to be in the days of cavemen and all that, right? But anyway, yeah. So I guess I was just referring to the give a mouse a cookie thing. Yeah. So like if you see the mouse and he wants a cookie, don't let him have it, because then he'll want another cookie. Then he'll want the whole box. Then he's going to want more space to eat it in. Then he's going to want more space than that. And eventually you're not even in your own house because you gave it over to the mouse. I don't know if this is a good lesson to teach children, though, because it's almost teaching them to think in terms of the slippery slope fallacy. Or what is the moral of the story? If you're generous to people, they will exploit it and take advantage of you. So just be wary of that. But anyway, yeah, some other examples to think of. What quantifies happiness? I don't know. It's whatever makes you happy is what's pleasurable. So I don't know. Certain activities are fun. Going for a nice run, listening to music, eating food. I can give you examples of things that make us happy. Maybe it has to do with, I don't know, dopamine receptors in the brain, neurotransmitters that release chemicals that give us feelings of pleasure. Minimize misery instead of maximizing happiness. I mean, I think that that's kind of two sides of the same coin, right? But anyway, no, all fair points, all good points. Well, let's just go on then. We just have one more, guys. We've reached the end. So naturalistic fallacy is our last. So the naturalistic fallacy. Naturalistic fallacy is pretty straightforward. This one is where a person just assumes that whatever is natural must be good in some sense of the word natural, and whatever is unnatural must be bad. So the mistaken assumption that whatever is natural is good and whatever is unnatural, bad. All right. All right, so that's the last of all our fallacies that we're learning, and there you see our definition. Okay, so for some reason, a lot of people get caught up in this way of thinking that if something can somehow be described as like resulting from nature, then it's something that is pure and right and, I don't know, as nature intended, and therefore it must be good. And if something is like man-made, synthetic, not derived from the world of nature, then that must mean that it's corrupted, polluted, bad, somehow toxic, dangerous, whatever. So like a person might say, hey, don't take these vaccines because these vaccines, they don't grow on trees. They're man-made in some kind of weird lab, and that must mean they're bad. But the problem is, though, if that's what you really think and that's how you really feel, then why don't you turn off this computer right now? Because this computer didn't grow on a tree at all. Is it a piece of human technology? Yes, it's an extraordinary technological achievement, but it certainly makes our lives better and more efficient and happier. If you think that things that are unnatural are so bad, then maybe you need to stop taking other forms of medicine, because all of these cures, remedies, treatments have been developed by human beings, not in the state of nature itself. And yes, Gabriel, I was holding off on that point. I know you're very insightful, and so you're jumping right to it. But yes, I was going to make that after I give a few more examples. But to speak on your point for the moment, I question the same thing. Philosophically, as a philosopher, I've always thought that the distinction between the natural and the unnatural is very poorly stated, and it's very blurry if it even does exist. Because look, to speak to the guy, I think what you mean. If you look at bees, they create beehives. Nobody says that's unnatural. That's just their form of life doing what they naturally do. Birds build nests. Beavers will work together in big collectives to build dams and stuff that block waterways. Um, Ants build ant colonies. But when human beings build roads, technologies, medicines, etc., people say that this is somehow unnatural. But how is that any different? What humans naturally have is a large, well, I shouldn't say large, but a very cognitively sophisticated brain. And so that's what we are naturally endowed with. Aren't we just using the tools provided to us by so called nature to thrive and survive in our environment? So, in my opinion, then, it's not so easy to characterize this distinction very neatly between the natural and the unnatural. But aside from that, given some kind of like a pre-theoretical understanding of the words, not everything that's given by nature is good for you. Let me give you some things, list off some things from nature that are not at all to our best interest. Hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, viruses come from nature. The vaccines don't come from nature, I guess, according to this way of breaking things down. But people seem to, have a problem with the things that are used to actually cure. Going back in history a little bit, right? Imagine organ transplants. That's a relatively recent human innovation. But when it first started, we were hearing people say a lot of the same things, like, "Oh, this has got to be, against God, because no way are you supposed to have another person's organ inside of your body. You can't think of anything less natural than that." And you got people talking about that's like Frankenstein. Mary Shelley's writing that book. But obviously, it's the best hope that many people have for survival if they've got an organ failure. And some people will say, I'm not going to take the recommended course of treatment if I have cancer or something. I don't want radiation. I don't want chemotherapy. Let me take homeopathic medicines and other natural remedies, quote unquote. But of course, in that case, you might be destroying your best chance to have a full remission or whatever it is. Gabriel, humans think they're special and better than nature. Bonus points because if you other nature, you can take advantage of it without feeling bad. Yes, I think that's probably true. Sky, I think it's because there's a difference, in my opinion, at least between a bee instinctively making a beehive to live versus us who destroy the ecosystem and make homes and roads for our cars. Yes, I mean, we certainly have caused big impacts on the environment around us. And many of those are somewhat self destructive, I can argue and agree. Um, but it's just that there's a much more nuanced picture here than to just paint with a broad brush. Natural equals good, unnatural equals bad. Somebody might say, hey, cocaine, is it really that bad? It grows from a leaf, a little plant called the coca plant. And, that was given to us by God. It comes from the ground. So we should just enjoy, what nature provided. But obviously, that's a highly addictive substance that can certainly cause all kinds of health problems, regardless of whether it grows by, the plant or not. Marketing and advertisers will sometimes rely on the fact they know a lot of us are caught up in this way of thinking. And so they'll market products and services to us on the basis that they're somehow natural, or green. You'll see people even selling like tobacco products, and it says organic tobacco, all naturally grown, as if that eliminates whatever carcinogens, tars, and other toxins that it has, and the addictive properties that it also has. So we should be a little bit wise to that, and we should not necessarily make broad conclusions about whether something's good or bad unless we're looking at it on a case-by-case basis. Yes, there can be things in nature that are good and things that are not good. It just depends on the example. I kind of look at the history of mankind as, in a way, overcoming the limitations put upon us by nature, if you want to insist on this distinction between the natural and the unnatural. Because, going back 1,000 years, the human lifespan was so much shorter. We didn't have so many technological and medical and scientific advancements that have made our lives better and more efficient and more streamlined, happier. So I know we do face a lot of problems and unsustainabilities as we go through the 21st century now. But it's not just a simple story of like, the movement away from the old world of nature has made things all worse. I mean, we're living a lot longer, and we seem to have a lot better chance to cope with the problems that nature throws at us. Gabriel, I think the difference is because industrializing is such a recent phenomenon, we haven't found equilibrium. Eventually, humans will, hopefully not through extinction. Yes, I think I can agree. I hope that doesn't happen. But we're alive for now, so I guess that's good. Okay, everybody. So I don't know if I have much more to say really today. they talk in the book about how some people use naturalistic fallacy type arguments to criticize, I don't know, like same-sex orientation. Like people will say homosexual encounters do not lead to children, and that's the natural goal of a sexual intercourse, and therefore it's immoral. So again, that's derived from the idea that the natural is good, which suffers from all the problems that we've talked about. First of all, what exactly is the natural again? And secondly, even if you were able to provide a definition, can you identify examples that justify this claim that everything natural is good and whatever's unnatural is bad? Kelvin, what about cruelty-free products? I've seen many people that still discuss that. Well, that's a different question, because cruelty has to do with the sentience of the thing that is being used, not about doing something unnatural. After all, I don't know, maybe in the state of nature, I mean, there's a lot of predation, there's a lot of killing and eating the other living things. So it's not easy to say that that's so unnatural from a certain perspective. I guess putting animals into labs and like performing weird experimental tests on them to see what things are toxic or what will kill them or how medicines function, I guess you could call that unnatural because you're removing them from their natural habitat. But yeah, I think there's a fair premise to want cruelty-free products if you care about the suffering of the animals on whatever moral basis. But yeah, there's some ballpark connection between discussions of that and the question of what's natural and not. So yeah, they say this also. Somebody says, I disagree that we need to protect big cats like lions and tigers from being hunted because we're only doing what they do. They're predators and so are we. But it says, and to follow, the fact that other animals are predators does not justify our doing the same. Some animals may eat their young, and a few female insects eat their male partners after mating. But these naturally occurring examples don't imply that it's morally justifiable for humans to do the same. The morality of these behaviors has to be evaluated on grounds other than that they are natural. Okay. So with that, I think we've reached the end of our topics for today. We've talked about all the 7 fallacies of unwarranted assumption. And now we just add that to our collection of concepts and knowledge for the class. We've learned 20 different fallacies, 5 of ambiguity, 8 of relevance, and now 7 of unwarranted assumption. So again, let me make sure I'm not giving the wrong fact about our schedule, but I believe it's next Thursday. Yeah, next Thursday is the quiz that we will have on this topic. So we'll talk a little bit about the way to prepare for that quiz on Tuesday after the weekend. But for the moment, just don't forget to do your homework that you'll submit to me through email before Tuesday class period. And I've also sent instructions for it through Canvas, so you can refer to those if you forgot. Is humans have been doing it for thousands of years valid? No, that's kind of appeal to tradition, and that's a subcategory really of the naturalistic fallacy. Like, this is how we've always done it, so that's the right way to do it. Yes. It's like somebody could say, I don't know, we've never had a system prior to 2015 in the United States that federally recognized gay marriage or something, and so it must be a bad thing. I don't know, like somehow we were closer to the proper order of nature before we lost our way or something in the more modern era. Yeah, you see arguments like that. It's not really valid, but I mean, again, it's hard to precisely say without a specific example. You could argue that if humans co-evolve with something, it's safe. Well, now that's a little bit more of a specific point that I have to consider. You could argue that I see you repeating that part, but I have to think about it. Sometimes I have to think about these comments a little bit. Anyway, though, guys, I think we're probably fine for today. We've reached the end of all my notes anyway, so I'm probably just going to let us go for the moment, but I'll post this lecture, and I do always have my office hours Thursdays from 4 to 5, so I'll post that later today, and if anyone wanted to, they could come by. But for the moment, I'll just let us go. So go ahead, feel free to say goodbye, and I'll close these 2 streams. Thanks, Dawson, and everybody else that's here present today. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Gabriel, for all your nice comments and contributions. Thank you, Kay. All right, guys. So I'm closing the Zoom stream first. So say goodbye, Zoomers. See you guys. And then, yep. Thanks a lot, Kelvin, and everybody here on YouTube. I'll see you then next time. And if you ever need anything, just be in touch through email. I'll see you soon. Okay. Bye-bye.